Right then, Hellraiser Wednesdays is kind of making a comeback. What I wanted to do today was basically discuss Julia Cotton and her role within the movie and why she's perhaps the villain, even above Frank. So we'll kind of get into her backstory in Hellraiser, but then also in Hellraiser 2, and a lot of these things, yes, is just from the movie, but then we have a discussion around it. I was going to do this one on camera, but I chose not to. I thought I would save you the hassle of having to look at my face. So who is Julia Cotton, and why do I think she really is the main villain of at least the first two movies, even above the Cenobites? Well, first and foremost, if we're looking at the Cenobites with the human characters and then just Hellraiser in general, Hellraiser is one of those movies that works because the demon-like creatures that are there are not actually evil. They don't serve the function to seek out humans to destroy and kill. They give humans the means by which to summon them if they have the desire to do so. You can kind of just put them down as gatekeepers to a club, and the club is a members only access, and you have to obviously ask for membership. That's all they are. Obviously they do come back to those people that have escaped, i.e. Frank Cotton, but they only arrive to those people that seek them out. So they're not really the villains of the franchise. Obviously they become that further down the line, but they're not in the first two movies. The villains of the franchise and those that have evil running through their bones and their blood, that's the human aspect, and that's kind of why it works so well. So why do I think Julia Cotton is perhaps the main villain, even above that of Frank? Well, we'll kind of get into her backstory. So with respect to Hellraiser 1, Julia Cotton, Larry, and of course the daughter, Kirsty Cotton, moved to England into Frank's abandoned home. Frank is of course the brother of Larry. Now of course the Cotton family didn't know that this was the place that Frank was tortured, murdered, and essentially dragged to hell for the eternity of sick, sadistic pleasures that he sought. Now, obviously, we can debate that it wasn't exactly this location, but it was the location by which the Cenobites came through from their domain and obviously pulled Frank back into their dimension. Now, because of course Larry cuts himself whilst moving a mattress upstairs and then the blood falls onto the floor, this is then a conduit by which Frank comes through. Now, it's important to note that of course Frank and Julia did have an affair, obviously straight up behind Larry's back. And this aspect in and unto itself is of course, a very questionable moral act. One could see it as evil. And as Frank began to pull himself through from the Cenobites dimension, it was Julia that found him, and it was Julia that was then coerced into aiding him essentially build himself back, bring himself back from the corpse-like state that he was in, the skinned, bloody mess that he found himself in. And Julia did this by bringing people back to the house for him to essentially feed off of, so he could become whole. So Julia used her body to then facilitate Frank's rebirth. So if we're looking at the first movie alone, without Julia helping Frank, there would be no story at all, because Larry wouldn't have done it, Kirsty definitely wouldn't have done it, and it was because of Julia's twisted moral nature that Frank was even able to come back. And this is then compounded on when in Hellraiser 2 we learn that Julia is essentially working for the Leviathan. The Leviathan allows her to come back. It's not that she was brought back in any way, shape or form, but we learn that Julia serves the Leviathan as her master, and in her own words, she was allowed to come back. Now, we don't know in what capacity Julia comes back. Obviously, she doesn't look like a Cenobite, so it can be assumed that she isn't, but she is definitively a servant of hell at that point, of the labyrinth of the Leviathan. And although we have Dr. Channard, the Dr. Cenobite, or who would become the Dr. Cenobite, he wouldn't have become the Cenobite unless it was for Julia who pulled Philip Channard into the labyrinth and pushed him into the Cenobite chamber. Without Julia, again, there would have been no story. In fact, without Julia, there would be no death to Pinhead and his Cenobite Gash, the Cenobite, the group of Cenobites that he controls. So again, if we're looking at it in the kind of context of the movie, and we're looking at all the moving pieces of this puzzle, without Julia, the first movie wouldn't have happened, and the second movie wouldn't have happened either, or it definitely wouldn't have happened in that way. So one can assume that obviously Julia and her motives and her moral compass is so twisted and so evil that it is actually her that essentially is the villain of these first two movies. And especially the first, because in the second, we even see Julia rip Frank's heart out. So we know that Julia was doing things to her own end at all times. So whether she had an affair with Frank because of some boredom or some twisted retribution, it's not 100% clear, but she definitely didn't love him, without a shadow of a doubt, because obviously she wouldn't have then ripped his heart out. And she wasn't exactly coerced into it either. She did it off her own free will, off of her own accord, and the Leviathan, one can assume, wouldn't exactly want one of the souls of his domain to be destroyed, or to be destroyed in that capacity. So again, Julia is most definitely the villain of the first and the second movie. It's interesting to note as well that she was due to essentially be the villain moving forwards in the franchise, but they kind of twisted her role. But if you're looking at it back into the first and the second movie, she most definitely is the villain. And I think that's what makes the Hellraiser franchise so interesting, is that although you have these horrific looking beasts, these demon sadomasochistic leather latex wearing creatures, and yeah, they look like they will do horrendous things to you, and they will. They only do it if you seek it. The true villains and the beings who are evil in this franchise, or were anyway in this franchise, because obviously it did move to Pinhead just being a slasher villain, is the humans. The human characteristics and the human nature is what creates the villains of the first two movies in Frank and Julia. So guys, I thought I would kind of just run down. Obviously it's not really a huge kind of bio on Julia Cotton, but I wanted to kind of just break it down and discuss why I think that she is the main villain of Hellraiser. And again, you can even just point to the fact that in Hellraiser 2, she willingly and happily would just drink the blood of numerous humans to regain her own body. And she only did that because the Leviathan let her go back to our dimension to obviously seek someone out to become another Cenobite. So she was only doing it for that. It was only going to be temporary. But anyway, guys, I thought I would kind of just bring you this different video. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, give it a big thumbs up, give it a share. And I know I've been a little bit lax on Hellraiser content. The main reason is a lot of these videos have been copyright claimed by Dimension Films, which is a bit of an issue. I'm waiting for some counterclaims to go through. If they don't, then unfortunately my channel will be copyright struck. And you know, that I then risk losing the channel, which is obviously a bit balls, but you know, I have to tone down a lot of this content because of that. If they go through the counterclaims and Dimension, you know, sucks it back in and obviously accepts that all of my use of this content is fair use because it is legally, then I will be bringing you some more reviews and some in-depth discussions about the universe and kind of my takes on certain bits and pieces, and we can open up the floor for a discussion-based format. So that out of the way, guys, I hope you did enjoy it. I've rambled for too long, but as always, I have been Mr. H, and I will catch you in the next video.
Julia? Don't look at me.